Now, Democratic candidate and Representative Tulsi Gabbard wants us to stop pretending that Saudi Arabia is one of our allies.
If you were president, how would you change our relationship to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia?
Stop pretending that they're our allies, first of all. You can go down a laundry list of things that show that even as much as the foreign policy establishment in Washington claims Saudi Arabia is an ally of the United States and they're battling terrorism and all of these things, they're simply not true. Their interests are not serving the interests of the American people. So whether you're talking about Saudi Arabia's continued waging of a genocidal war in Yemen with U.S. support that is illegal, that Congress never authorized, a war that's taken the lives of tens of thousands of people, causing millions more to suffer, creating the worst humanitarian crisis in our generation. Or you're talking about Saudi Arabia's both direct and indirect support of terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda in countries like Syria and Yemen to further their own objective and their own means. Or the fact that Saudi Arabia continues to spend billions of dollars propagating this most extreme, intolerant, exclusivist branch of Islam, the Wahhabi Salafist ideology that is literally the creating the fertile recruiting grounds for terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest voices pushing this administration towards a war with Iran.
So this is why Tulsi Gabbard, this is why she belonged on the debate stage. I think she's one of the few people that are talking as much about foreign policy and especially against wars in the Middle East, of course, and our support of Saudi Arabia. Other candidates, of course, have talked about it as well, Bernie Sanders. But I think she has been talking about it the most, and I got to give her a lot of credit for that. Look, the thing about this in the Middle East is Saudi Arabia and Iran are bitter enemies. Saudi Arabia would love to see the United States launch a war in Iran. Not only that, but Israel would love to do it as well. So now, tensions, of course, are pretty high between the U.S. And Iran at this point. You have, of course, the nuclear deal that Donald Trump had pulled out of. Then you have the mainstream media talking about the tankers, which, by the way, the owner of the tanker, which was a Japanese one, was a Japanese tanker and a Norwegian tanker. The Japanese crew said, look, we were not hit by a mine. We were hit by some sort of projectile. We don't know where it is. We don't know where it came from. But it's not anything that we don't believe it was the Iranians, right? And then, of course, you had a U.S. drone, which we might have been violating their airspace when they shot that drone down. So all these tensions have been escalated between the U.S. and Iran. Now, who wins in that situation? Saudi Arabia and Israel. Not the United States. Not the United States. Now, Gabbard also caught a lot of attention for an exchange with Representative Tim Ryan. Now, Tim Ryan, like you guys may have seen this in the first Democratic debate. Tim Ryan basically said this, quote, he said, the reality of it is if the United States is not engaged, the Taliban will grow. And we will have bigger, bolder terrorist attacks. And we have got to have some presence there. And he's talking about basically endless occupation of Afghanistan. Well, now wait a minute here. Why would you want endless occupation of Afghanistan? Because that's what this would entail, right? Now, Gabbard pushed back and she said, hold on, let me get to that quote first. But look, for one, obviously, we do not need to stay in Afghanistan. For one, the Taliban was not behind 9/11. That was Al-Qaeda. 15 out of the 19 attackers on 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia. Osama bin Laden was from Saudi Arabia, right? Now, the Taliban had nothing to do with 9/11. That's ridiculous. It is a complete 100% lie. And so Tim Ryan, of course, unfortunately was pushing the mainstream narrative, which tends to always seem to be in favor of war. Now, Gabbard, of course, said this. She said the Taliban was, quote, there long before we came in and will be there long after we leave. We cannot keep U.S. troops deployed to Afghanistan thinking that we're going to somehow squash the Taliban. And she had also pushed back and said, no, that was not the Taliban that attacked us on 9/11. It was Al-Qaeda. And of course, another falsehood that was going around, and that still persists to this day among some members of the right and the establishment, is that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11. I can assure you he absolutely did not. Did not. Now, for the substance, again, she is 100% correct. What are we still doing in Afghanistan? We got to get out. We got to get out. Again, Afghanistan is a mess. And look, they will never run the way that we want them to run. Why are we continuing to waste money and waste lives in this country where it's known to be a place where empires die? The Soviets invaded Afghanistan. It did not go well. And it's really not going well for us either. We got to go. We got to go. And as far as Saudi Arabia, look, the only reason that we're helping the Saudis, and that we're so-called allies, is cheap oil. That's why we ignore their human rights abuses. We ignore the fact that women are third-class citizens, that there are people that are still beheaded for witchcraft. That is not a good place. And as she mentioned, they continue to spread the most radical, extreme version of fundamentalist Islam, right? That's Wahhabism. That's Salafism, right? They spread that all around the Middle East. And, of course, that ended up growing a lot of actual terror groups. And yet, this administration wants to continue selling weapons to aid in their genocide in Yemen. Look, the Obama administration did something similar. We've been allies with Saudi Arabia under both Democratic and Republican administrations. And we need to stop. We need to stop. Especially now since our weapons are being used to aid a genocide in Yemen. So yes, Tulsi Gabbard, I got to give her a lot of credit on this one. She's absolutely right. And unfortunately, we're not talking about this as much. Any progressive administration has to sever ties with Saudi Arabia. They are not our friends. Now, the best way to do it, and you might be asking, but what about the cheap oil? Well, we should enact a Green New Deal. We should do something on the domestic front, right? That guarantees 100% renewable energy. No more oil. No more need to suck up to the Saudis. As bad as they are, by the way, I have to be clear, that doesn't mean I'm for regime change. I'm for non-intervention. So, besides, what happens when a majority of our countries, Europe and the United States, Canada, all that, start to go to renewable energy? Well, you deprive the Saudis of a majority of their funding through oil. And so, look, that would be the best way to actually combat the Saudi Arabian monarchy. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.